been a long time since Ohio State was considered not the premier program and team in the Big Ten, but they did miss some championship games based on fluke games and plays, but pretty much making it a regular thing now with 4 consecutive trips to Indianapolis, this time against Northwestern. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports and our weekly breakdown on the Buckeyes. Pat, how you doing today?
I'm good. Excited that it sounds like there should actually be a football game this weekend. So, looking forward to covering that. And like you mentioned, a big game. Obviously, the Big Ten championship is a big deal anytime, but 4 straight in the Big Ten championship game era is something that's never been done. Ohio State has a chance to do something for the first time, which doesn't happen very often these days. So that's a cool aspect with it too.
Let's dive into the matchup against the Wildcats. And Northwestern typically lightly regarded nationally and in the rankings. They must prove themselves. And they have. They had a trip up against Michigan State just a couple of weeks ago, but certainly dominated Illinois by 18 points this past weekend. Had some impressive wins early in the season against the likes of Iowa and Wisconsin in particular. This is a Pat Fitzgerald bunch. They're going to come. They're going to play hard. They're not going to be intimidated. They're going to do all the right things. They're going to play sound fundamental football in 3 phases of the game. I think this is pretty much a typical Northwestern team under Pat Fitzgerald.
Absolutely. And, just watching this team play, or it reminds me of the team Ohio State played the Big Ten championship game a few years ago. Obviously, the personnel is different, but they do a lot of the same things, and probably a team that is underappreciated for what they do, what they've done the last few years, kind of building this program into a team that, frankly, is contending for Big Ten championships, and that wasn't the case for a while. So I think, Ohio State may not get the credit nationally for playing a Northwestern team, but, if you ask anyone who's faced Northwestern, I think they'd tell you that this is one of the best teams in the Big Ten, no doubt. I think it starts on the defensive side, one of the best defenses in the country, a top 15 defense in terms of total defense. And just like a few years ago, I remember Urban Meyer talking about how, they may not get some of the big plays that Dwayne Haskins and those receivers had gotten all year when Ohio State faced Northwestern. They were going to have to be patient and, take what the defense gives you. They don't make mistakes. These are all things Urban said. And Ryan Day already this week has started to kind of echo some of those sentiments about this year's Northwestern defense. Mike Hankwitz has been doing it a long time. And, as Ryan Day said, there's not many things he hasn't seen. You may get him once in a game, but you probably won't get him a second time with something similar. He's able to adjust really well. They're very fundamentally sound, and they just kind of keep the game in front of them. And it's a bend, don't break defense a lot of the times, which means Ohio State will certainly have to be patient and just take what is there, what's available, which for the most part, Justin Fields and this offense have been good at. Other side of the ball, a little bit different than Northwestern teams of the past. Peyton Ramsey, the quarterback that was at Indiana for a few years and Ohio State fans have seen in the past, is now leading the Wildcats after a grad transfer. And he's had a pretty solid year, 1,218 yards, 9 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. The big thing with him, as Ryan Day also talked about this week, is he just doesn't make the big mistake. Ramsey's not going to cost you the game. He may not have the major arm or the legs that are going to win a game in any given moment, and that may be why he ended up transferring out of Indiana. I'm sorry, because we saw what they've been able to do at quarterback. But he's not going to lose you a game. He's going to keep the chains moving for the most part, and get the ball to their various weapons. They've got a good run game, some talented receivers. So it's going to be an interesting matchup for Ohio State. The Buckeyes are certainly the favorites in this one, but Northwestern can cause some problems, and they'll have to be ready for that.
In recent weeks, after Isaiah Bowser has been the back to be productive for this team, going back to that 2018 team that Ohio State faced in the Big Ten championship game, they found a few other options, in particular in the backfield, that are a little bit more dynamic. And on the defensive side, despite a personnel change that happens with college football teams when you're talking about facing a team 2 years later, Blake Gallagher, Chris Bergen, Patty Fisher, those are linebackers that have racked up hundreds and hundreds of tackles. The 3 of them have to all be in the top 5 in the history of Northwestern tackle leaders, and then Newsome is one of the top cornerbacks in the Big Ten. So it's the talent always gets undervalued, but they are a talented team that again does all the right things.
Yeah, and it's funny. We talk about talent, and obviously that starts with recruiting. And Justin Fields talked this week about how there was a period during his recruitment where he visited Northwestern and really thought about committing there, which is interesting to think about now with the level of quarterback Justin Fields has become. Obviously, it's been talked about in the past that he was committed to Penn State, obviously went to Georgia, ended up at Ohio State. But, before he was 5-star and talked about in the same breath as Trevor Lawrence, that was a guy that they thought they might land, and he thought he might go there. And I think one of the things that Pat Fitzgerald has done is continue to not only develop players really successfully, and you just listed a number of guys, but they've started to recruit at a bit of a higher level too. So your floor is a little bit higher than it was, for the first several years of his tenure, as he's obviously proven what a good coach he is. The coordinators there do a good job. So, I think you mentioned a guy like Drake Anderson, the sophomore running back who's kind of taken over a little bit in that backfield of late. That's a guy who developing a little bit earlier than maybe some of the Northwestern offensive threats have in the past, which you want to see. That's what you want to do if you're starting to build a program. So, I think this is a big opportunity for Northwestern. Obviously, they weren't able to get the job done against the Buckeyes in 2018. But if you can win a Big Ten title against especially against a very talented Ohio State team, then that kind of sets you up for better things in the future. And then from an Ohio State perspective, obviously, you just want to get the job done. I mean, you've set your goals at the beginning of the season to win another Big Ten championship, to go to the college football playoff, and now you're at that point. And Ryan Day called it ring season this week. Your chance to take one of those goals and make it a reality. So big game for both programs in this one.
The team 2 years ago, Northwestern, was lightly regarded in this matchup. It was a very similar matchup in regards to just the optics of the situation. Ohio State with the high-powered offense, with all the NFL talent, with a team that had only lost one game that was eventually would finish as a Rose Bowl champion, top 3 in the nation, against a Northwestern team that lost some non-conference games, made their way through the Big Ten actually with an 8-1 record. Moved on from the Big Ten championship game and beat a good Utah team in a bowl game. So they certainly could compete across the nation. But against the Buckeyes, final score 45-24, but it was 24-21 at one point in this game. And it was competitive into the fourth quarter before the Buckeyes really put down the throttle. And they're a 20-point favorite this week.
Yeah, I think, you probably imagine a similar type of game in this one, in terms of how it plays out. I think Northwestern will probably keep the game close for probably longer than Ohio State fans would like, make the Buckeyes a little uncomfortable. You've got to figure out this Northwestern defense, like I was mentioning earlier, and that takes actually going against it. Seeing it on film is one thing, but you've got to execute against it and not make mistakes. So that'll be key. And then, as we've talked about each week, this Ohio State defense, what does the secondary look like? Will it, look as good as it did against Michigan State? Was that a positive sign a few weeks ago of moving in the right direction, even though Michigan State's not an elite pass offense? Neither is Northwestern. And this rush defense for Ohio State has been very good all year. And that's kind of the key to stopping this offense, as we've seen in the past. So, can those two units step up, especially the pass defense in this game, and kind of push the Buckeyes to a win, as the offense, as we expect, will figure out ways to score points as they have all year.
And on a side note, something that few people, I'm sure, are talking about, and certainly Ohio State fans don't want to hear about, but if Northwestern wins this game, they're 7-1 with the Big Ten championship, and I know they're only 14th in the nation right now, but if you add up the wins, Iowa, Wisconsin, Ohio State, and a Big Ten championship, they should get college football playoff consideration. But again, we won't think necessarily in that direction. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports to talk Ohio State Northwestern Big Ten championship coming up, and the Wildcats an unlikely second time in 3 years as a Buckeye matchup in the Big Ten championship game. Usually there's a gap between the conference championship game and National Signing Day, even with this reprisal of the system in this early signing period here now over 3 years. but it all smashes together in 1 week, which I'm sure adds to the difficulty in some regards. The pandemic has added to it, something that Ryan Day addressed.
Yeah, it's been a crazy year for everyone when you go to the recruiting side of things, and obviously a crazy year on a lot of sides. But for people who don't follow it as closely, there haven't been the chances for official visits or any of the normal things. Visiting kids at school, visiting kids in their homes, those type of things since the spring when the pandemic started and the NCAA kind of shut those things down, and they've continued to push back dates when coaches would be able to go out on the road and kids would be able to take official visits. And that's affected everybody. This isn't just an Ohio State problem, but with it being close to the start of the early signing period, Ryan Day did address this week, and just that, in a normal year, obviously the Big Ten championship game would be over. They'd be preparing for either a bowl game or a college football playoff appearance, and coaches would be out on the road right now, trying to get those last minute guys, maybe a flip here or there. Now it's all done via Zoom and things like that. So FaceTime and whatnot. So fortunately, these coaches have gotten pretty good at that, because that's how all of these, how they've built a lot of these relationships, I guess I should say. There were some kids that obviously were able to visit before the pandemic began and everything shut down. But a lot of these guys have never taken an official visit to Ohio State or any school. They've never, been to an Ohio State game in person. Maybe some of them haven't even met these coaches in person, which is just crazy to think about, given the relationships and how you cultivate those during the recruiting process normally. Despite all that, Ohio State still has the number 2 recruiting class in the country and a chance at the number 1 recruiting class when things are all said and done with a few more guys out there. So, it's really impressive that they've been able to not only maintain a talented class that they had back in the spring, but add a number of guys to it, continuing to build. Credit goes to the coaches, but also to these recruits who have done a really good job on their own of continuing to forge relationships with each other, and kind of spreading the word of Ohio State, for lack of a better term, and getting some guys to commit that maybe, if this class isn't as focused on recruiting themselves, don't end up at Ohio State. So it'll be a big day. It'll be a different day for Ohio State on Wednesday, when guys can first start sending in their faxes, because that's still a thing in recruiting, and with their letters of intent. But Ohio State will be happy to get this class wrapped up. Ryan Day also talked about just the kind of people that these guys are, and he'll speak more about them on Wednesday, when he can address guys by name and things like that. But rest assured, Ohio State's very happy with what they've been able to do and the class that they're going to land here.
I've got to think that whoever eliminates the fax portion of this is going to become a legend in college football history, whenever that's going to take place. I would have thought that would have happened like in 1994.
Right.
Regardless, it's Ohio State recruiting, and it's National Signing Day coming up on Tuesday. And as Pat references, Ohio State's got the number 2 class currently, according to 247 Sports, and across the board. I'm going to bring up one negative, one positive to the way Ohio State would have to approach recruiting during this particular year. The one negative I would think would be it's a national program. Therefore, they're not just recruiting in state or even in the region, but they're going to Florida, to Texas, and sometimes to California in particular, and then all the other states connected, Georgia and the like, to get recruits. And in this, with all the obstacles that you just pointed out, to draw kids out of those regions without the visit, without the face-to-face, I would think would be a huge challenge. On the other hand, the national brand, the record, just the name itself, I would think would help when other programs and institutions rely on more selling the relationship, selling the school, selling other things, involve the intangibles, as opposed to Ohio State just saying, hey, look at our record.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, the name Ohio State, having that block O on your jacket, we've heard it from coaches in the past, that certainly gets you in more doors than if you're at a lot of other schools. And in this case, it gets you in more Zoom chat rooms, I guess. But then there's, still the competing with those other schools that are on that same level, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, the Oklahomas, USC out in California, those programs. So that's where you then have to build that relationship and kind of cultivate things. And it's just had to be done a different way this time around. I think what has helped is that these kids are so in tune with the technology that they are used to, that's how they talk to friends, talk to other recruits, things like that. So to them, maybe it's not so foreign to, maybe have never met assistant coach Brian Hartline, for instance, in person and only talked with him on FaceTime. Things like that may seem strange to coaches who do it every year and kind of have a process, but these kids that maybe didn't get a chance to really start taking their visits and go through the process are used to communicating that way. So I think in some ways that works out for a place like Ohio State. But yeah, I think everyone will be happy whenever it is, we can go back to the normal recruiting process and, everything that comes along with that, which includes fans in the stands and traveling and whatnot.
And certainly it can't be replaced, the face-to-face relationship that can be built. But at the same time, I got to think that maybe the approach might be slightly adjusted in the future where you can maximize resources and time by having the Zoom call and maintaining contact with some of those recruits that actually are, like you say, that's the way they grew up. They're comfortable with it. They're fine. It makes no difference to them. All right, Pat Murphy talking Ohio State football. Of course, the Buckeyes get together with Northwestern for the Big Ten Championship at noon Eastern time. One other thing, Pat, because it's being talked about via Dabo Sweeney, via Greg Sankey, SEC commissioner, they're not direct. They don't name names, but it's obvious what the target and who the target is because they're referencing teams that play only 5 or 6 games making the college football playoff. Is that anything that's been brought up to the players or to Ryan Day, or what is your take on this?
It has. That was actually one of the talking points yesterday. And Ryan Day, Justin Fields, we also spoke with Jonathan Cooper, all kind of addressed that they were aware that these things were being said. They've heard it. They all kind of said they don't care. Ryan Day said he wasn't going to get involved with the emotional side of defending your team's or your conference's chance to be in the playoff. I think that which is probably the smart way to go about it from an Ohio State perspective. Look, if Ohio State wins on Saturday and is 6-0, they've got a strong resume. Is it as strong as everyone else's because they haven't gotten to play as many games? No, and I think there are certainly arguments that can and have been made on that front. I think if things go as planned, Alabama, or as people think they will, Alabama's in. If Notre Dame wins, Notre Dame is certainly in. If Clemson wins, I think both Clemson and Notre Dame get in. And then Ohio State is there. Texas A&M is a team that could be considered. Florida losing this past week to LSU kind of took them out of the mix a little bit. And Ryan Day was asked about that and didn't want to go down that road at all. He just said, we have to handle our business. And that's what we're focused on. But, and then you can make a case for someone like a Cincinnati, Coastal Carolina, as neat of a story as that would be. I just don't see the committee doing that unless there's chaos, and that may open the door. But I think Ohio State's in a good spot if the Buckeyes win the Big Ten championship and finish 6-0. I also think that things could happen where a lot of situations could happen, I guess is what I'd say, and the College Football Playoff Committee is going to have to evaluate everything. I definitely don't think it hurts Ohio State to put up a big number on Northwestern. If you beat Northwestern by 7, 14, 21, you're 6-0 and you're a Big Ten champion. But if you can, get a convincing win, a 35-point win or something like that, I think that just helps your case a little bit. So I don't put a ton of stock into the record mattering. I think as long as they were 5-6-0 at this point going into the Big Ten championship game, they were in a good spot. The committee has continued to put them in the top 4. So, we'll see what the rankings are when they come out on Tuesday, but I imagine they'll still be that 4th place team. And, then it'll just come down to what the committee thinks coming out of this weekend.
as chaotic and complicated as it may be elsewhere, I think it's very cut and dry based on what the committee has stated about Ohio State and where they've placed the Buckeyes. They're number 4. They're playing the 14th ranked team in the country. There's nobody behind them that is playing as quality an opponent. So how in the world can they get jumped if they win? I just don't see where the committee is. They basically placed themselves in a position to put Ohio State in the playoff if they win the game.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely. I think the only thing you could say is if Ohio State doesn't look good but still wins the game, does Texas A&M jump the Buckeyes without? I mean, we've seen crazy sort of things happen in the rankings, but I mean, they've set themselves up, as you said, to have it play out this way as long as the teams that they think that are favored to win will win. So yeah, I mean, I think if as long as it plays out the way everyone expects it to, I think the rankings are pretty cut and dry. It's if you start to get a little bit of that chaos here in this last weekend that maybe something else happens.
Okay, Pat, we always enjoy the conversation. Catch Pat Murphy's work at Bucknuts 247 Sports on Ohio State athletics. Pat, we appreciate it. Hopefully we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Appreciate it.